So, Tom, not sure where to start. You want to jump off with the Auditor General's announcement or report today in Quebec?
Lots of stuff in there, as usual. By the way, she's just really, really solid, our Auditor General. She was on mostly about the child care centers, daycare, and she was quite concerned about the fact that many of them are not getting a passing grade, and I think we should all be. It's also true that the CAC hasn't delivered on the number of places that are supposed to be there. It's still a huge problem for parents to find a place, and then more and more often, they're having to turn to private daycare where they pay a whole bunch more. And so overall, not very reassuring for the CAC, again, on a social file. But to be fair to the CAC, they got one thing right. They've put in a bit of a moratorium on people being evicted, as it's been happening more and more in the province of Quebec. So they understand that it is their responsibility to take care of these social issues, but daycare seems to really be one of the poorer dossiers for them so far.
Yeah, and I mentioned when we talked about this earlier, it's not as if this is an off year. We're seeing the situation get worse year to year.
It's because they haven't made it a priority. I mean, that's what happens in governments. If something's a priority, you get it done. But again, I'm going to try to be super fair to the CAC here. They did put a lot of money and effort. It hasn't worked, and they didn't have enough to do both. But they tried to bring in this 4-year-old kindergarten. And you know what? It's a huge success where they were able to bring it in. So this is a long-standing argument between people who would tell you that in childcare, when you're at a daycare center, you're getting early childhood education. And even in the French system, they call the people who work in those CPEs, the daycares, they say these éducatrices. But it's not the same thing at all as being in a 4-year-old kindergarten. You're getting not nearly as much stimulation in terms of your preparedness for school. It's a long-standing debate. But it's not true that it's the same thing. But I think that Legault was right to try to put some effort into bringing in the 4-year-old kindergarten. They were never able to complete it. I mean, Bernard Rainville, the education minister, was blunt. He said he actually used the BS word in his French talk and said, "Look, I'm not going to BS you. It's not true. We're just not able to get it done. We don't have the resources." So, he gets marks for candor, but of course the CAC doesn't get high marks for delivering on promises.
So let me go to Santé Quebec. So we had the big appointment a couple of weeks ago, the new head of Santé Quebec and Geneviève Biron. And now today we find out the head of their board of directors, another woman, again, though, this time not in the healthcare sector. She's in the hotel sector.
Yes.
I'm wondering what you thought of this appointment today. And in fact, all the board of directors, all 15 of them.
Well, I mean, I went through the list and I know a lot of them, but I'll tell you one of the things that's worried me about this agency since day one, and this has just proven it for me, it is very centered on Quebec City. I'm taking nothing away from Madame Germain. Her family owned a lovely restaurant in Quebec City and now own hotels up there. She's a good manager. Will she be able to run the board of directors? As in that function? Of course she will, and she'll do, I'm sure, a great job. But the problem is when they're going to get somebody in this field, they pluck them out of Laval University. And if they want somebody, they go to get Madame Germain, and so on and so forth. The problem is, of course, that the problems are in Montreal. They're in Greater Montreal. And you have a bunch of people going onto this board who have zero sensitivity. Not all of them, but most of them have no understanding, experience, or sensitivity to what's going on in the various institutions that were built by the diversity of Montreal, by different ethnic, cultural, religious, linguistic groups. They've put hundreds of millions of dollars in donations into the establishments that are closest to their communities. It's important to understand the role of the foundations, the specificity of those institutions, and all of that will get zero comprehension or attention from this new board of directors for the agency. So that's why it's going to flop. And I've been in French and in English, in writing, and on the in the electronic media, I have been strongly backing Christian Dubé. I was again with one of his closest advisors yesterday, and I always give the guy top marks for who he is and what he's doing. But at some point, you can't take your eye off the ball. You can't let the bureaucrats decide who's going to be on this board. And there is almost zero representation of Quebec's diversity. Almost zero. There is some, but very, very little compared to the diversity that's there. And often people who have already worked, even there, people who knew or worked with the CAC. So I'm not taking anything away from them as individuals. I'm really careful to say that because it's sincere. I'm not targeting them. I'm just saying that what they've put together as a critical mass of people is not going to be able to get the job done because it knows nothing about Greater Montreal and its particular problems and the challenges that are there.
You know, Tom, to that point, it kind of begs the question, doesn't it? Is this an oversight or is this done for a reason as far as the CAC is concerned?
When they had a 3-person group putting this together, okay, they announced a group. And it was, very lovely if and very representative if your name was Jean-Guy or Marie-Claude or Marie-Pierre. I mean, it's almost as if there's this massive blind spot for Quebec diversity. And so, of course, what you're getting here is a reflection of that. There was no order given, down the pipes saying, by the way, this has got to represent diversity because otherwise we'll never be able to have a proper system to manage these institutions. So if that means that people whose only life experience is Quebec City, and it's, very, very little diversity in Quebec City, more than there used to be, but still very little compared to Montreal, it's not going to work. You can't have the ability to manage something if you don't know it or understand it or even respect it. And unfortunately, that's what they've just cobbled together. The thing's going to fail.
Okay. The other thing, by the way, in the healthcare sector already failing, this new idea of, getting appointments by, they call it GAMF, I guess, or whatever that acronym is, where doctors get to, get referred to a patient, I guess. Yeah. And we're finding out now that, it works really, really well. In fact, some dead patients just got appointments, and other people already had doctors also got appointments. It's embarrassing, Tom. We talk about this with the SAAQ. This is healthcare, and this is the best they could come up with, a system that doesn't even work out of the gate.
And going right back to Quebec City, the main university hospital up there, just had to admit that for 6-7 months, all appointments were going into a black hole. They weren't going out. So people weren't getting their appointments because of a glitch in the computer system. Jeez. But of course, Eric Kerr is going to continue taking care of the SAC and everything in the Quebec government because he's the guy that Legault put in charge of that. He used to be his pit bull, and now he's in charge of stuff that he doesn't seem to be able to deal with. So there is such thing as competence in public administration. There's such thing as knowing what you're doing, and there are people who know what they're doing. But instead of getting this big boost that I had always hoped that would be there, and as I say, I've backed Dubé's agency idea, saying it is, in terms of public administration, it's a good idea. But then you have to pay attention to the details. You got to actually get the thing off the drawing board and into practice. Ain't going to work. And this is the same thing here.
Now, I know you mentioned from time to time you work, of course, doing commentary on French TV and French radio as well. I saw this posted earlier today. Tula put this up, Tula Dramonis. It's from Sophie Desrochers, and the quote is, "On n'a pas réussi à vacciner nos jeunes contre la pandémie d'anglais." This, I guess, based on the fact yesterday, Jean-François Robert is taking a look at new OQLF data, suggesting that in some cases things are going better. But in this report, people in the 18 to 34-year-old bracket using mostly French outside the home, it's 74%. This continues to go down. 18 to 34s using, say they use French for at least 90% of their workday, has dropped from 64% in 2010 to 58% in 2023. And it only applies to that group, Tom, and we all know what this is about. It's about the internet. It's about social media.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's exactly what it's about.
Yeah, and this is what you chose to attack today. I just wonder what your take on that was.
Well, because she's a colleague, it's always very difficult for me, and I'm obviously very deferential to somebody that I work with, and I frankly find Sophie quite likable because she doesn't say what she's supposed to say. She's not politically correct, and I kind of like that side of her. But I'm always very uncomfortable when somebody uses a comparison to an illness when talking about another group of people or the language that they speak. And it does make me singularly uncomfortable that she would make the comparison to a pandemic. I'm sorry, it's just not on, in my view. I can remember going back years and years ago, there was a guy who was actually a smart guy and followed linguistic issues very closely, and he was trying to explain before a court what it was like, the type of work he was doing. And he said, well, it's like if you put a pollutant in a river and you want to see which way it's going. And so everybody said, hold on, you're just comparing the English-speaking community of Quebec and the English language to something that pollutes Quebec. You can't do that. This is like Donald Trump talking about poisoning the blood of the country, that sort of stuff. So I'm sure Sophie knew what she was doing when she does it because she's very smart, but I think that this was singularly ill-advised and totally inappropriate to use that sort of term to describe people who are your neighbors.
Yeah, said the woman, by the way, who went to Columbia University.
She's you know, and I know that she speaks English without an accent. Yes.
Last thing I want to ask, Tom, another story that's sort of come up today. Or can you explain? I guess this is a couple of days ago, but I was away for a couple of days. I heard Mark Tanguay going on about wanting wanting Canada to be half French by 2050. And I thought to myself, out of all the things that are going on right now, this is a provincial Liberal, right? A leader, interim leader, bringing this up. Do you have any idea what's going on here?
Well, I have absolutely no idea because I didn't see that quote. So I'm sorry I missed it.
Okay.
I'm usually pretty good at scanning stuff. I didn't see that one. And I don't know what that would be supposed to mean. Does it mean that he would hope that half the people in Canada would be able to understand some French? Maybe, by taking, if the kids wind up taking something like an immersion class, I hope that is something along the lines of what he was suggesting. I can't see that would be possible with regard to the demographics and the number of people that would be required to change the current situation, which is another reason we should always understand that, for all of those who live here, no matter what our language is, it's always going to be a fight to make sure that the French language is protected and it's promoted. But no, I'm not sure where that quote came from.
Let me read you just the beginning of it. It says, this is a Gazette article. It said, Quebec Liberal Party leader, interim leader Mark Tanguay is making an ambitious proposal that half the Canadian population be able to speak French by 2050. To do this, he wants Quebec to become the flagship of the Canadian francophonie and for the federal government to double its target for French-speaking immigrants. The Liberal leader estimates the number of French speakers in Canada is at 29%, including those in Quebec. In a letter signed by Tanguay, the party leader says that, quote, to improve the fate of French in Canada, Quebec must notably put pressure on the federal government to increase French-speaking immigration targets, unquote.
Yeah, well, that's what the feds are already doing, by the way. I remember visiting a French school in Brooks, Alberta, and it was all French, and the parents were 80% immigrants to this country, many of them from French-speaking countries in Africa. So it's happening in Manitoba. They want to make sure that they get a good share of francophone immigration. So I think that's a big difference. What Mark is saying, and I'm going to try to interpret it after you've read that to me. I think that what he's trying to say is that we should probably have more immersion for our kids and people. If you can understand your neighbor a little bit more. I work in media sometimes with people who are highly regarded, who I regard very highly, but I know that they could never even read the title to a French language editorial, much less read the editorial, and so they've got this massive blind spot to what goes on in the province of Quebec. They just can't follow any of it. So then it becomes easy to dismiss. And then you wind up with stuff where people really don't understand each other. So understanding the other language, of all the things that you can do in Canada in terms of your education, interestingly enough, people who immigrate to Canada, it doesn't matter where they are in the country, because they often help their kids a lot and push their kids a lot, getting them to try to learn French is going to be top of mind for most of them.
All right, I'm going to leave it at that.
Take good care.